Hello again, everybody. We're going to start talking about books and all the joy that they bring to our lives. So we were talking about statistics of book sales. So globally, yes, it is expanding still. In the US also, even though most people don't read books, that's what we hear. The truth is lots of people are reading books to the tune of big money, $25 billion actually in 2019. And 50% of all published books are related to education and science, and 751 million books, physical books, were sold in the US in 2020. So you need to be amongst these people. I know I do too. I said I'm going to be better about this. So we have lots of information, and part of it is we should recap what we learned in Author Bootcamp 1. One of the big takeaways from the authors then was, where do you fit in this vast marketplace? What genre do you want to be in? Where is your passion taking you? On the screen, you have quite a few genres. You may find yourself in there. I never thought about comic book or graphic novel as an actual genre, but now I can see it. And as you're reading this list, you probably are thinking, I could write a cookbook too. Or I could write a romance novel. You know, the opportunities are endless. So if you have an idea of what genre you want to be in or you think your work would fit in, you can put it in the chat if you wish, and we can see what people are saying. I think for me, mine would be some type of fiction, some type of story. I feel like I have the best dreams that if only I could remember them, they would be blockbusters, the best movies and books. But I'm not exactly there yet. I see adventure, right? I know a lot of people are doing travel now too, like travel blogs and travel books. I see self-help devotions, yes. Under self-help, the landscape is so vast of what you could do, you know? Graphic novel, I see that, okay. Awesome. So as we keep going through, we need to figure out what are these gems from Author Bootcamp 1 that we need to remember. And if you were not in attendance or if you don't remember at this moment, you can still go back and see it. On our LTO, AKA YouTube page, Author Bootcamp Part 1 is there if you ever want to revisit it and relearn and revisit your homework assignment, to which I still haven't done, but I promise I'm going to do at some point. So I think what is best is we get into the meat and potatoes of our event today. And partially, I need to bring up our moderator, who is Bria Perdaman. And I'm going to pull up her bio and read it to you. I'm going to stop sharing so I can pull it up. Apologies again. I appreciate your patience today. Bria Perdaman is the Director of Corporate Communications at a leading PR firm where she manages national communication strategy and media relations for the world's largest companies. Bria partners with company executives, stakeholders, cross-functional teams, and influential leaders to grow brand awareness, influence public perception, and improve consumer sentiment. Bria's career expertise spans across the technology, consumer goods, advertising, and food and beverage sectors. With a deep journalism and public relations background, Bria has led communications efforts for some of the largest Fortune 500 companies, including the Coca-Cola Company, Google, McDonald's, and the Clorox Company. Aside from serving as a full-service communications professional, Bria is passionate about investing in young, diverse, upcoming talent. Bria is from Chicago, Illinois, and holds a BS in broadcast journalism and an MBA from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. At this time, I will turn it over to our moderator, Bria Perdaman.
ILL. Sorry, I had to. Someone here has to have gone to U of I or know somebody that went there, right? Okay, yep, I know there's a couple people on here. Thank you so much. I appreciate that intro. It makes me sound much more interesting than I actually am. So let's get to it. I'm excited to be your moderator today. I have the pleasure of introducing all of our wonderful speakers. So I will start with Ms. Jacqueline Andrews. Oh, my computer is doing something very odd. All right, gotta love it. Jacqueline is an author and professor of English and literature. She earned a BA in business education and an MFA in creative writing from Chicago State University. She published her first novel, Heaven's Eyes, in 2011, the sequel, Still Watching, in 2015, and most recently, the last and final book in the series, Seen and Unseen. She has been teaching English composition, English literature, and humanities courses since 2006. In addition to her writing, she is also a coordinator for the Odyssey Project, a college credit program within Illinois Humanities for income-eligible adults. She loves to read, travel, shop, and experience different cultures. Jacqueline currently resides in a suburb of Chicago with her husband and daughter. Thank you so much for being here today. Since our last author bootcamp, you have gotten into some even more exciting things. Can you talk a little bit about your new blog, Wordy Professor, and the 40 Plus Files podcast?
Yes, well, thank you so much, Bria, and thank you, Lakeisha, as well. So the Wordy Professor was born out of just as a writer. I published the books, and I've had the books, and I was kind of led to record the books for Audible, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. And I wanted to just start writing again. And this idea had come to me years ago. And this year just kind of went for it. And so the blog is, my tagline is semi-random thoughts of a professor, writer, mother, wife, human, because that's essentially what it is. I talk about a range of topics. My blogs are, you'll see the humor in my blogs. So some days I might be deep and philosophical, some days light and whimsical. But yeah, it's they're pretty fun to read, I think. And again, you might learn something. So you might laugh and you might learn something. So the 40 Plus Files is a brand new venture. The podcast will premiere the week of Christmas. Hopefully that's what we're on track to do. And it's just my way of lifting up women over 40. So I have had the opportunity and have been fortunate enough to have interviewed some amazing women, and this is just the beginning. So women over 40 doing some extraordinary things. That is the tagline for the podcast, and it will be available on all major podcast networks. So Spotify, Google, and Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, you name it, it will be available. And it's just, my guests are women over 40, and they range in age from, 40 something to my oldest guest thus far, will be 80 tomorrow. So yes, and she has done some amazing things. She's she's a retired teacher, and she is a television host, and she's still going. So hopefully the podcast will inspire women over 40 to just go for it.
Amazing. Thank you. Everybody, please be sure to check out this wonderful blog, tune into the podcast, and you're already going to get a lot of great information today. So thank you so much. Moving on to our additional speakers, I'd like to introduce Dr. Michael Allen. As a school principal at Oakton Elementary School near Chicago, Dr. Allen recognized the huge need for reading materials that depict young Black boys in a manner that is authentic and relatable, as well as positive and life-affirming. Named the 2020 Elementary Principal of the Year, North Cook Region, by the Illinois Principals Association, Dr. Allen tirelessly advocates to end policies that hold students of color down, and replace them with trauma-informed practices, equity, emotional intelligence, and mindfulness in schools. To that end, Dr. Allen recently founded Holistic Equity, WE, Leadership Consulting, where he empowers and equips educators, administrators, and all types of leadership teams to center racial consciousness in their work. So excited to have you here. Dr. Michael, is there anything that I missed or anything new that you wanted to share?
Thank you so much. Can you all hear me fine?
Yes.
Nothing. No, you hit everything for sure. I think the only thing that's new is that since as of September 2021, I am no longer in public education. So I'm spending a lot of time just traveling around the country, supporting leaders of all kinds, but mostly schools with a lot of the things that you highlighted here. So I'm loving this new life with not having to do that regular 9 to 5 stuff, but and loving grassroots equity work, everything from speaking, supporting, writing, and coaching and mentoring folks who are trying to do right by all vulnerable and marginalized people. I don't know if is Gilbert up next, because I was
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. That is wonderful. Congratulations on that shift. And now we have Gilbert Allen. Gilbert Allen should not have finished high school, let alone earned a master's degree in social work and be working toward his doctorate. As a child, he struggled in school, faced extreme poverty, homelessness, and parents who battled drug addiction. There was a time when he thought excelling in football was his only way out. But at the critical age of 15, his older brother, Michael, himself a full-time college student at the time, intervened. Michael made the extraordinary commitment to take legal guardianship of Gilbert, and together they began to dismantle the messages of self-doubt and despair that Gilbert had internalized all his life and replaced them with love and affirmation. While Gilbert did indeed excel in football, breaking a number of school records, earning all state honors and a full scholarship to college, he is most proud of leveraging his education for his life's purpose, giving back to kids on the margins who just need someone who gets it. So thank you so much for being here with us. Gilbert, is there anything else you'd like to add that I may have missed?
No, you hit everything. The only thing that's new with me at this point is been able to step into my purpose of being able to give back to kids. So I started a mentoring program for all kids here in Chicago, and then also working as a clinical program manager of a hospital for a PEDS unit to be able to help different kids that's going through hard times. But other than that, that's the only thing that's new. Yeah.
That's a lot new. So congratulations on all of that. So happy to have you all here with us today. The title of their book is obviously very fitting. You see, he was like, "You're going to introduce Gilbert, right?" I know that's right, brother. I was definitely going to introduce your brother. No worries, no worries. So let's dive right in now that we've met our authors and reintroduced them to some of you all who attended our first author bootcamp. So we know that we have some folks who have already started their writing process, but may be facing challenges that they're not sure how to overcome. If you've come upon any challenges on your writing journey, for those who may have started, please drop them in the comments section. Just want to see, while you think about it and see, I randomly, just a little overshare. I have these moments where I'm just like, wow, this would be really good in a book. What book? Who knows? What type of book? Only the Lord knows. But I'm just like, wow, this would be riveting, probably only to me. And then I jot it down, and then it sort of stops there. And I don't know if that's a normal thing. I would be interested in you all's thoughts. But is that something that you all ever do, just like, or have done, just writing down sort of like random passages or notes, but you're not even sure like what piece it's for, but you're just like, this is on my heart, and I feel like I just got to get it out. And it's sort of the buck stops there with me. So that's me. I see someone. Okay. Lisa, you said yes, a start and stop. So can we address that quickly? Like, is that normal? How do you get past that? Is that okay to just do that and maybe it doesn't go anywhere? Would love to hear you all's thoughts. Jacqueline, Michael, Gilbert, everyone wants to jump in.
I would say it's very normal. Sometimes it's you have to step away to regroup. So, don't feel bad about stopping, but just keep in mind that you have this goal right in front of you, and that, it's something that you want to do. So don't feel bad about stopping. You might have to just stop to regroup and then go back and revisit, and then you may find that you have fresh ideas. So starting and stopping can be advantageous. So.
Okay. That's making making me feel better. I hope it made somebody else feel better. It's all part of the process. Did you have something to add, Michael?
Yeah. So what the only thing I would add in addition to that is just understanding that those pauses give you clarity to kind of find your word, your message. There are just various points that Gilbert and I went through, which trying to collaborate, especially like with me being an older brother, him being a younger, to make sure we were clear about if we're going to tell a message that captures two Black men in the 21st century, we need to go through a growth process to be ensured to be clear about what our message is. So those pauses actually give you a lot of clarity around what your ultimate message may be. So if you're trying to write a story in the summer, it looks a lot different than how you write it in December. So that period of time actually does help you. You don't like it. Like I was the impatient one, believe it or not, when we went through those challenges. But at the end of the process, it was the right thing. It made the most sense, and it actually helped the clarity of the story.
That's great perspective. Just need to reflect. Like pause and reflect. That's good. Let's take another one quickly. Tiffany said, I am a published author trying to write book number 6. Wow, congratulations. While managing social media, speaking, and all of the things, but I want to write. Can you all talk a little bit just about like management and wanting to do everything as you should, and tackling that?
Yes, well, congratulations, Tiffany. That's definitely something that should be applauded. But I mean, today, I think we're all trying to juggle so much, which I think is, it can be something that we all battle from time to time. But the main thing is to try to carve out time. There are 24 hours in a day. Sometimes you may have to visit an hour that you're not accustomed to visiting. You may have to wake up an hour earlier than you usually do. Okay. Just to, I call it stealing time. Or you may have to stay up later, because that's pretty much my life right now with all of the new ventures that I have going on. I'm working twice the amount of hours that I used to work. But again, I have an end goal in mind. So when you have an end goal in mind, it's not that you'll probably always find yourself working or trying to steal those hours early in the morning or late in the day. But for now, you have to do what you have to do. Okay. That's my 2 cents.
That is good. That's speaking to me. You like me, you might have to wake up a little later, a little earlier. I don't want to, but that's good. That is some level of sacrifice. And maybe some behavior changes. That's what
Absolutely.
I'm hearing. Yeah, those
Sacrifice,
are, yeah,
for sure.
Michael, were you gonna add to that?
Yeah, I'll throw my 2 cents in. Jackie did a great job. What I would say is, in addition to the points that were made, thinking through how you can identify coaches in different areas of your life, because that'll sort of be accountability for you. So everything from having a health coach to a therapist, to a spiritual guide to a professional coach, those monthly check-ins sort of bring me back to making sure I prioritize the things that allow me to manage my life. I like the idea of life management rather than time management, because you can't get time back, but you can actually proactively put a structure in place that'll actually yield the things you want for your life. So that's the best thing I would say, is just thinking through who are the people who already are there. They don't necessarily have to be formal, that you can put into being your accountability partners in these various areas. So for example, writing, if there's a person or two who can hold you accountable for check-ins, then that'll allow you to make sure you prioritize that in your life. Otherwise, it just becomes another thing that you're trying to juggle, and that's almost impossible with everything that's going on in the world.
That's good. Accountability partner. That's a big one. Okay. Love it. Thank you. Thank you all for sharing some of your thoughts and sharing some of your challenges. We are going to work through this together. So say we have started our book. We have some things down on paper, or we have it electronically. How do we keep moving forward? And we sort of talked about this, but touch on it a little, if there's a little start and stop, but literally someone that's like, I actually want to write a book. I sort of know what type of book I want to write. I got some things down. How do I push past that? Like, what are the next steps? Like, what if we're not translating what we have in our head? on paper. So it's like we have something on paper, but it's really not translating. It's just like, what options do we have at this point in the process?
You want me to jump in first?
You all, whomever. I don't want to call on you. Just whoever feels inclined.
So what happens when you hit sort of a tough point,
Yeah.
a writer's block, essentially?
Yep.
I think it's one of the things that many people recommend. It sort of depends on your budget, but thinking through what an editor would look like. And that's a person who obviously would edit the grammar and the type of message you're trying to tell. So if we want to target, which we wanted to target 4th through 8th grade. It's a huge age group. But anyway, our editor could help us be accountable for making sure that our story hit that audience. But there were periods of time to where we had to identify what were the defining 10 events that we wanted to capture in the book. And we really were stuck at 6. And so the editor helped trigger certain thoughts that allowed us to get back focused and back on track. That's one person. Also, another example could be maybe thinking through who's a person who you already trust. So I'm going back to the mentor and the coaching piece, who you could probably have read where you got stuck at and sort of have a conversation with you to get you out of that period. Those would be my suggestions, though. Sometimes the fact that you're stuck is an indication that you need to step back and either minimize something else that's going on in your life, and then once you do, you'll be able to come back to it, or kind of pivot in a different direction. So that would be my advice based on the experience that Gilbert and I endured throughout the book writing process. Not just for the book that's done, but even book 2 that we're pretty much done with now.
That's helpful.
Yes, absolutely. Everything that Dr. Allen said. And just to kind of, piggyback from that is that sometimes you will hit those roadblocks. But again, just kind of keeping the goal in mind, just, this is what you want to do, but you have to sometimes step back for your own sanity's sake. Okay. I think and it just depends on a person's, your character and your personality type. If you're like me, you're type A, you like everything to be, just so, or once you get in that zone, that's what I call it. It's hard for you to stop. And sometimes things may get a little bit jumbled up. And then you have to say, you know what, let me step back for a second. And also, I think it's important to reach out to other people. Dr. Allen said, that's also important. You want to be held accountable, because if there's no one holding you accountable, then, it's easy to stop and not go back to it. So, and I think I mentioned this before, but just because you want to write a book, it does not necessarily mean that writing is your strength. You may have a winning idea, but writing just may not be your strength. So you get someone who can help you, help pull those ideas out and make some sense of them. It could be an editor, it can be someone like you, Bria, who's just masterful at, communicating ideas. And so that's what you want to do. You want to make sure that you stay on track like that. And I know that's hard for some people to hear. Okay, well, people have written these books, but no, writing just may not necessarily be your strength, but you probably do have a story to tell. So if you have a story to tell, you want to find someone who can actually help you frame that story. Okay, in a good way. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's helpful. Like on sites like Fiverr and things like that, they have a whole host of ghostwriters. So I mean, that's sort of what I do for a living, not for authors, but for brands, ghostwrite their messaging. So yes, 100%. It's like you could have a great idea, but maybe you're not the one to write it per se, but you could articulate your thoughts. And someone else could pull it together for you. So at least there's options, because I feel like that's kind of like step number one. People are like, I would love to write a book, but I don't like to write. Or I would love to write a book, but I'm not a great writer. So it's like there's options. So that's helpful. Staying here a little longer. Risk, everything in life has risk. Some things more than others, but we know when it comes to your creative real estate, it's normal to feel a little uneasy, like, okay, what are the risks involved? I'm sure there's plenty involved in authoring a book, but things that just come to mind, like if I bring someone into my project, like a ghostwriter or something like that, are they going to steal my ideas? Are they going to mince my words? And I'm telling them my intent, but then it comes to life differently, and then it changed the whole concept. Or, what can we just talk risk? Because I think that's something that people think of, but they're just like, I don't know if that's right to think like that, or how do I mitigate that?
I mean, you kind of hit it on the head. There's always a level of risk involved anytime you're sharing creative ideas, because your ideas, if even if a person has one idea for a book, that's their baby, and they may feel some type of way about putting it out there because somebody else may steal it. But you have to be confident in knowing that if that's your idea, and I'm kind of going back to the spiritual aspect of it, what God has for you is for you. And this isn't my own. I got this from Yvonne Orji. Some of you may know her as Molly on Insecure, but she has a book called Bamboozled by Jesus. And she talks about this in her book. If you walk down the bottled water aisle in the store, I mean, that tells a story in and of itself. So I say that you have to take a risk and put your work out there and not worry about it. If somebody steals your idea, you're creative enough to come up with an even better one. So yeah, and then there's just one quote I'd like to share. I listen to books now since my books are on Audible, but by a writer by the name of Florence Scovel Shinn, I think, and she says, "There's no competition on the spiritual plane. What is rightfully mine is given to me under grace." So if it's rightfully yours, and that that's your story to tell, then just go for it. Put it out there.
I like that. Thank you for that.
The only other thing I would add in that, that's a hard follow because risks are important. I would say, but there's a mantra that I live by that I'm sure it resonates with everyone on the Zoom call. It's one of my own words I kind of learned maybe about 20 years ago. Be willing to risk who you are for what you hope to become. Be willing to risk who you are for what you hope to become. So if you want to become the next version of yourself, you have to let go of where you've been and where you are today, and you got to risk it all to get there. It doesn't feel good, but that is the good space to be from a spiritual perspective. So I'll say that. Now, intangibly, what that means, depending on what you're going to write about, there are other risks too. Number one, you do have to have to have your idea or your work taken serious. You do have to put a budget aside to make it real. That could be putting aside a certain amount of money through researching what the book is going to cost to get it to the certain point. Also, it could be putting aside your time. So when you're sitting down writing and spending time to write the book, it's time you could be with your loved one, your children, your family. And so there's a certain cost that's attached to that. It's not just money, but it's time. Then your story. So for example, Gilbert and I decided to tell a nonfiction story. And we're talking about not just us and our journey, but aspects of our family. Talking about anything related to your family, it could potentially have a risk on the relationships you have with them. Even though you may just be telling an objective fact that everyone knows, the risk is that they could have a problem with you for saying it, especially in intercultural space. There's just feelings that people have when you talk about things that are going on in your family, and there's a risk that you have to kind of think through how to portray that. Again, I like talking to authors who are thinking about writing books that talk about their lives related to other people, and making sure they're clear about what the point is of their story. You can't therapy isn't through writing a book. It's actually making sense of your story and sharing it to other people. If you haven't been able to make sense of it yet, then it's dangerous to actually share it with the world because it could have harmful effects on other people and you don't know your point yet. So once you know the point of the message of your story, I think it's okay to share it, but be accountable and protective and make sure love is reflected in your family if you're going to talk about other people. They're not going to like you for sharing it anyway, but you can still find love in that. And then the last thing I would say is also think through your current day job. So for me, when we wrote the children's book, the first book, I was an elementary principal. I knew that I had 5-year-olds who saw me as the center of their universe, and I was their role model. I wasn't going to talk about some experience that was really intricate in college that may have involved sex, because I'm a role model for these kids. So I knew that there was a sacrifice and a risk that I wasn't willing to take. So now that I'm not in education, I'm able to talk a bit more openly around what my journey was as a Black man trying to navigate space in America. But because I was a principal, I knew that it wasn't appropriate to put that out into the world in that space. But that's a risk that you have to think through at this space of life. And I don't think a lot of people think through that element, but those are the types of tangible risks that I think you should be able to understand.
That's great. So the list goes on. It's a risky situation, but the reward is outweighing the risk. No, that's awesome. I see a lot of snaps and great points. So love it. Thank you. Let's keep it moving. So, we have thoughts in our head sometimes, especially when it comes to something that we own creatively or that we're thinking through, and we think it's a hit. It's like, you know what, this is going to be a bestseller. They're going to turn this into a movie, or maybe I just think like that. I don't know. But, we should think like that. We should pump ourselves up and have that level of confidence. But we know that in order for things to truly be successful, especially as it relates to books, other people's opinions and their feedback is important. So, we know that feedback's important, but then maybe we could even take it a step further and say like proper feedback. So the question is everyone qualified or well suited to give you feedback? Like, is it okay for me to just ask my sister or my good girlfriend, they don't know anything about books, what's a good book, the book process, and it's just like, and I take their feedback and they're like, oh, they hate it, and I'm like, so I shouldn't put this out. Like, can we talk about feedback just a little bit?
I think feedback should be well-rounded. And what I mean by that, it's definitely important to ask your sister or your friend or your niece or nephew or whomever, right? Because everybody reads. So feedback from just people who read, that's important. But absolutely, you want feedback from editors, you want feedback from mentors, you want feedback from, people who are your potential audience or your readership. Okay, that's definitely important. Feedback is important, but you have to also stay true to your personal your personal goal. You want to remain authentic. Case in point, I'm a big fan of Lovey Ajayi. She's a blogger, and she's a 2-time New York Times bestseller. Sorry, but she's about to release her 3rd book, and she shared a story about her editors telling her, well, since this book is geared toward young people and teenagers, maybe you should change this part about this or that. It's dating you a little bit. Now she's young, she's 37, and I can say she's young because I'm older. But she kind of had to stand her ground. She's like, I really appreciate your feedback, but they're gonna get all this, auntie, in this part, because I have some experiences, right? I've lived through some of these things. So if I sound a little bit dated, okay, I'm just gonna have to sound that way. And she's like, I appreciated their feedback, but I kind of wanted to leave this part in there. So feedback is definitely important, and it should be well-rounded. You want it from all ends. I still like it from, to get feedback from some of everyone, and you can take what you need to take, and then you can set aside what you don't necessarily feel like, is a part of your journey.
Other things I would sort of just echo the same thing, that the people who seem the most natural in formal feedback that can actually directly lend itself to your finished product are probably editors. They don't necessarily have to be formal editors, but people who have those skills. So I just want to echo that same point. Jacqueline made that point, but I think it's really powerful to think through that piece. The second piece I would say is, if you really do a good job, and it takes time to figure out what this means for you in your journey, but if you assemble a team that you trust, that you feel like is competent, that'll sort of constantly give you that accountability in the form of feedback throughout the process. I am very spiritual, so I feel like I prayed, and my brother, and we prayed about what we needed to get through this journey, and God sent us what we needed to get through different phases. And so there are people who are able to give us the information that we need at different points in time in the form of feedback that allowed us to continue to progress. But think about your team. It might just, right now, it's just 4 people that we have on our team. But you know, in the 2 years, it might be 15, you know, so think about those people, because they'll be the constant. There'll be that voice in your head as you're writing or you're trying to tweak different parts of your work. And then the final piece that I would say is study groups. So one of the most powerful things that we did with the first book is we were able to get, I think folks are referencing this, we were able to get the intended audience, people. So for me, it was easier because I'm a principal. I could literally say, I'm donating this book to my students in this grade level, and they're gonna read it and they're gonna tell me what they think about it. You know? But if you can get people who are actually your intended audience, so we wanted to initially start to target 4th through 8th grade Black boys. We eventually moved our target audience to 4th through 8th graders of all races. So our audience, that study group, helped us understand, here's the message we were trying to tell. Are they receiving it the way that we think, or are there elements of it that we should be a bit more clear? And during different phases at the latter part, it did help us tweak our message. We decided to use N-word versus N-I-G-G-A in the book because we wanted to model what equity looked like and should look like for young people, not just Black people, but actual all young people that fit within the age range. That feedback that they were giving us about how they were receiving our message helped us refine what the finished product would be.
This is good. These are great points. So if you're in this sort of feedback loop and you're getting all this feedback from all these different places, when is enough? Because you could receive feedback forever and you could just keep saying, oh, well, I need another opinion. I need some more thoughts. And you just keep pushing it out and pushing it out. Is there a point where enough is enough? Because I think that's sometimes a hard thing to gauge. Just like, okay, is this enough feedback? Like, have I talked to enough people?
Okay, I mean, I think that, you know, again, you have to stay true to your own vision, because some people will give you feedback, and all feedback is not positive feedback. You know, some people will, I mean, because here's the thing, when you're writing a book, you know, a book is a legacy, something that will be out there forever. And I learned this when I published my first book 10 years ago. And I was talking to people in the industry, people who had published books and things of that nature. And that's one of the things they said, that some people are going to give you feedback and it's not going to be good feedback. So you have to learn how to filter out all of those things. Feedback in terms of, you know, I guess there can be levels to it, so to speak. So if you want feedback on the, you know, aesthetics of your book, you know, I think that's the editor's job, you know, or the people who you have in your team, like that Dr. Allen said. But feedback on just, girl, what you think about this, right? They may be honest or they may not be honest. So you have to be true to your vision and follow your spirit on when you think it's enough feedback.
Right. The only thing I would echo is, remember, like, you're the author of your own story. And so there's a certain element to where you're going in a different direction. Anybody can tell you that you want to go on purpose. And that goes back to the risk that makes it necessary. I give you some examples of things that you have to think through that just logistically, they don't matter, but it's just the thought process that I think does. We had to think through whether we want a table of contents, a glossary, and a study guide in the book. The more that we added these elements to our story, we took the risk of saying, is this a book that's only designed for at-risk kids? Or is it a book that kids who are advanced and gifted might want to read too? We sort of hung our hat on the reality that we wanted to create a message that could activate the maximum number of young people in this age. The story itself, because of how heavy it was, is going to captivate the highest performing students. But if we don't make sure that it's accessible to kids who don't necessarily read between 4th through 8th grade, then we're taking a risk that we weren't willing to take. So we ultimately decided that, even though some of the people on our team said, hey, if you add in a glossary, that makes it look like a book that's remedial. And if you add in a study guide, that makes it look like a resource that parents who are upper middle class might not want for their kids. We disagreed. And of course, it was easier for me as an educator knowing that if we're careful about the marketing, if we're careful about the different pieces, it's worth the risk. But that feedback that our team kept telling us, like, don't put the glossary in there and don't put the study guide in there. I knew that if I listened, the people who were in 8th grade, who read at a 5th grade level, wouldn't be able to understand the book. So I was willing to take that risk. So that feedback was helpful, but I knew intentionally on the front end that we were gonna still have our product turn out the way we wanted it to, because we knew the vision of the young people on the other end of that.
That's good. So what I'm hearing from both of you is, at the end of the day, you got to own your own narrative, excuse me, and you got to keep the train moving. You have to take ownership over your work. No one can stop what you're trying to move forward. So it's your work. It's your responsibility. You got to keep it pushing. You are the conductor of the train. The train is moving if you say, let's go. So that's important. I think that's a big thing, especially for us who are just, either have never written a book before, you're new, you're unsure, you have a lot of doubts, and you're like, I'm holding a lot, other people's opinions hold a lot of weight, even sometimes more weight than your own opinion. And it's like, no, your name is going to be on the book, not theirs. And you gotta keep it pushing. So this is great. Now let's get into another element of books that's really important. Titles, covers. We know that this is sort of a necessity for a book, and we've all had an experience of making a first impression when you see a book and it's like, either it's a good first impression or it's a bad first impression. It's like, oh, I would buy this, and it's like, oh, that looks a little shady, or whatever the case may be. But we know that visual component of it is important. So can you all speak a little bit more about these elements, the title, kind of the design, the cover, why they're so important, and just any tips for choosing them? Because it's almost like choosing a name for your business. People spend so much time like, oh, that sounds good, maybe just to this group. So I think it's the same situation with the cover and the title. What's that process like? Are there any tips to help people not spend 17 months on a title?
Mm-hmm. Well, personally, I think that, a title, and this is something that I tell my students all the time, because when they write papers, some of them are so hung up on the title. And I tell them the title of the paper, that can come last. The title of a book, because think about this, sometimes a good title will only come after you have written the content. And then you can pull from the content and say, you know what, there's the title. Or in terms of the book cover, you definitely want it to be something that ties into the content of the book, the genre of the book, the message that you're trying to convey. All of those things are important. So, but it's not something that you want to halt. You don't want production to be stopped based on the cover of the book or the title of the book, because the truth is the title, not the title, but the cover of the book can be revamped over and over. There's some books out there that have been around for years, and I've seen 4 to 5 different covers of the book. So while it is important, you want to make sure that it's something that grabs me. And I'm going from basing this off of feedback that I've gotten. You want to make sure that it's something that that'll grab the reader, something that will, pique someone's interest or whatever have you. So it's definitely something that you should spend some time on, but keep in mind that in terms of the book cover, it can be revamped. You can improve upon it as many times as you need to. But yeah, that's my 2 cents as far as the cover of the book. But the title, I would say work on content first and then let the title come after.
You got an order going on. Okay, so it might be trying to put the cart before the horse a little bit when you're like, let me start off the process thinking of a great title.
There you go.
Like now the title doesn't even match anything that's in
Yes.
in the book. Okay, that's good.
Yeah, so I'm echoing the same sentiments as Jackie. And in fact, I think we need to take this road take this show on the road. Jackie, you're stealing all my ideas in my head. The only other things I would add, though, is just it's basically going a step further. Is for our experience, what we sort of broke a lot of the rules that we're saying now, and because we broke them, we learned the hard way. So we sort of wanted a longer title. We kind of had a vision, but what I realized throughout the process is like, I'm a visionary and Gilbert's similar, but we paid an illustrator to actually do this. So we had to trust our illustrator's vision. We said, here are the things that we want to capture in the actual cover of the book, the picture that is. So, you know, he came up with his own product of that. Then he kind of gave us aspects of different pieces. So what we try to do is to leave this to the actual illustrator. Like the picture itself, even the words. Now the picture is all him. Now how brotherly love is captured and then the actual letters at the bottom, that's all our personality. But we don't do the actual picture stuff. That's not my gift. I couldn't draw a straight line if somebody paid me for it, but I am a visionary. So I kind of laid out all the foundational pieces, and Gilbert did as well. And then this is what the illustrator, whose gift is to capture the essence of what we see, our vision in that. So this is the phase where I think, like Jacqueline said, you can't get here. He actually forced us to say, you're not going to see a cover until the actual finished product of the book is done. The last thing is actually the cover. And I thought that was crazy. But once we got through the process, it made complete sense. So I think you kind of have to understand that. I will say, though, don't turn down your vision or your personality or your philosophy, because where I saw our vision come back to life was how brotherly love popped out on the page. The words at the bottom and how our names were actually captured, the back of the book, the different parts of that and what we said there. But the picture that captivates the reader and the art audience, you really have to leave that to the person on your team that is their wheelhouse. And you kind of have to force yourself to stay out of the mix of trying to regulate that piece, because I mean, I can't speak for the rest of you, but that's not my gift. So the more and more that I had to understand that, I was able to find more peace.
That's a good point. And some people might sit around and they're like, wow, I'm really struggling. Whenever you get to that point, I'm really struggling with coming up with the design cover. And it's like, maybe you're struggling with it because that's just not your strong suit.
Correct.
and it's someone else's strong suit, and they probably wouldn't struggle with it. They come up with something off the top of their head in 30 seconds. So that's good, sort of this process of like outsourcing a little bit, like lean on some other folks, lean on other people's strengths. Like you don't have to go at creating your book by yourself. That's what I'm hearing over and over again from all of you. It's just like, it is a little bit of a collective process. Like it's your book and it's owned by you, but it kind of takes a village in a sense to bring it to life. So I think that can help people just feel a little bit better. Like, oh, I don't have to sketch out the cover by myself. Oh, I think that's just something people don't really think about. So that I love that. That's great. Now, continuing in this vein of sort of like book design or just like laying things out, I'm imagining that there's probably some sort of specific guidelines in terms of like sizing, parameters, specifically when it comes to sites like Amazon or Kindle or something like that. Are there places that people can go to check, like if I want to host my book on this site or I want to post it here, like it has to be some sort of specifics as it relates to any of these elements? Can you talk about that? Just, you know, because I would hate for someone to create something and then it falls outside of Amazon's guidelines. I don't even know if that's a thing, but.
Yes, absolutely. So this would be more on the self-publishing side. So if you have a publishing house, they'll take care of all of that. But if you're self-publishing, then yes, you would be responsible for making sure that you meet all of those requirements and the guidelines in terms of the sizing. If it has to be, 5 by 8.5 or whatever have you. So yes, you have to make sure that you meet those, and you just have to research or outsource things like that. If you don't know anything about that, then you can always hire. You mentioned the site Fiverr. It's a wonderful resource if you just need something like that done. There are thousands of people who know all of the intricacies when it comes to sizing, books for if it's going to be a paperback or a hardcover book or whatever have you. They know how to do that. Some people, your gift is writing. That's it. That's all. My husband used to tell me that all the time. Look, you're the writer, stick to writing. Okay. So, and I'm okay with that. But, now I think because we live in such a resource rich, world or society, I think that it will behoove anybody to do some of the lead work yourself, do some research, look at some YouTube videos, read some books, do the digging to find out what you would have to do. But yes, that is definitely important, especially if you're self-publishing. Reach out for some of those resources and do your due diligence to find out if your book is going to meet these guidelines.
Yeah, and for the most part, so the most common platform that many authors, especially independent or self-published authors, we use, the first book we wrote is actually independently published, so it's self-published on our end. We had a person on our team who was responsible for this, which is the same thing they typically do. They have a whole department in many cases in publishing companies, if you go that route. The only thing I would say, what I love that we were able to do, and we sort of just did it on accident, through self-publishing, we learned all these different components. So Amazon, so if you're going to try to buy any book, our book or Jacqueline's book through Amazon, you can just type in the title and find us, right? But if you go a bit further, you can just sort of type in, like, the platform that pays us is called KDP, and that's where it's actually registered. If you go in there, they'll walk you through all the regulations that are necessary in order to be able to upload the book. If you get to the space to where your book is successfully uploaded, you've met all their guidelines. They'll walk you through it for the most part, step by step, and hold your hand. At this phase, it's not as complicated as a process as you might think. It is always good to have someone who's an expert and has gone through the process many times to kind of support you through different phases of the process. But that's what I would say. There's sort of benefits to going a certain way, but if you go the publishing route, they have an entire team of people who do this. So you just, you're more or less just sharing your story. They'll kind of handle this part of it from a logistics standpoint.
Okay, that is helpful. And we're going to come back to that too. Going at it on your own or having a publishing house, we're going to get into that at the very end. But I want to move on to sort of posing a question to everyone. Would love if you all can just share your thoughts in the chat. Just what comes to your mind, even if you're not familiar with this process. We talked a little bit about it, so you got a little bit of a cheat code because we got a little bit of tip on the editing tip. But here's your question: why is book editing important? What comes to mind? Like, let's drop them in the chat. Let's talk about it, just so we're totally clear that editing is crucial. I'm sure we've all read books that had a ton of typos or just something that just looked really off, and you're like, "Whoa, what happened?" And it might have been an editing issue. So would love to see some of your thoughts in the chat. Okay, I'm reading them as they're coming through. Grammar, that's a big one. It's your brand. This is something that's your legacy and it lives on. Yes. Run-on sentences with a lot of exclamation points. Clarity, ensuring that your story speaks directly to your audience. That's good. What might sound good to you might not be appealing to others. Yes. You need outside eyes, someone who doesn't love your book, baby, like you do. Oh, I like that, book, baby. That's good. Any more? While we dive in. Credibility and establishing yourself as an expert in certain realms. That's good. All right, Dr. Allen, Jacqueline, what do you all think? Lots of good stuff here. You've already touched on some things, making sure your thoughts are expressed. That's good. Can we just talk for a minute about editing? Because I know this is crucial and it might sometimes be overlooked, especially for maybe a person like me. I write all day and I'm like, oh, I don't need anybody to help me edit my book. Like I write. And then the book comes out and they're like, girl, this is not it. And I'm like, wait, but I thought I was a good writer. So, I mean, can we talk about that? Setting the tone.
So absolutely. Everybody is, you are dead on. All of those things are important. And here's why I'm such an advocate for editing, because my first book, I was kind of pushed into publishing it before I was comfortable. Let's just put it that way. And I won't go into detail. I knew that it was a good story, but it was not edited to the point where I was comfortable. And so after, of course, reading the book, I'm like, oh, it's a wonderful story. Heaven's Eyes, The Scandals of Macklin, first book one. I mean, amazing. But aesthetically, it's not my best work at all. It's my very first book. I was in graduate school when I wrote the book. But when it came out, people were going crazy over it. I got rave reviews. It's a wonderful story. But of course, now if I were to write that book, it would be completely different aesthetically. editing is important because some people, when they open up a book and they read it and they find, a mistake, they're done. Most people, I'm going to tell you, are not like that. But you have some people who are, who may be educated to the point, and they may be a little bit persnickety when it comes to literature. And they may feel like, okay, well, if you took the step and you put this work out into the world, then you should have, made sure that all of your I's were dotted and your T's were crossed. Okay, so that's not necessarily going to be the case. I mean, I found errors in books that were, published by huge, huge publishing companies, but that you don't want to get caught up there either. Editing is just important because you do want to put your best foot forward. And I was telling Lakeisha this the other day, because my first book is now available on Audible. I got a chance to sort of right those wrongs. And, I feel like it was my opportunity to read the book and give those characters actual voices, and so that people who are listening to the book can really understand, the scope of the story and the power of that narrative. But yeah, a book is a book is a book. If it's a good story, yes, people will be enamored, they will enjoy it. But editing is important because, again, everyone is not created, people are not created equal in terms of how they view people. Credibility, they may say, okay, this writer may not be all that credible because, the spacing is off here, or there's a spelling error there, or whatever have you. Years ago, we did not, Microsoft Word was not as intelligent as it is now. So Word now will tell you if you have spacing issues. Word will tell you now if you're using words in the wrong context, right? It'll underline it in blue. So it goes far beyond spelling errors. So, even, back then, it wouldn't underline anything. So, you have those things. But yes, aesthetically, and also you want to make sure that the structure is good. So editing is definitely important for all of the reasons that people are echoing here in the chat.
Thank you.
The only things I would add is sort of just the idea of keeping in mind that editing is synonymous with polishing. It is sort of refining your message so that it captures the maximum number of people, and it speaks to their soul, their mind, their hearts. And so the value of it isn't to really change what you're saying, it's to enhance what you're saying. It's a really grueling process, though. Again, I'm saying that because I struggle with it. I wrote a doctorate, and I remember going through my dissertation and cursing my people out in my head. Like, this is my work, like, why, and I took my first draft authentically connected to my spirit, personal, when they were trying to tweak it. But the reality is, at the end of the day, you're just trying to refine your message so that it hits the maximum number of people and they can respect what it is you have to give to the universe. So keep that in mind. Other things I would say is, when I think more specifically about the process that Gilbert and I utilize about the book, we're technically sitting at a third draft of the same book. So like, if someone were to purchase our children's book today, the current form that's off the press from China, it has a glossary in it, it has an actual study guide, and it's hardcover. The original book itself is just a paperback version of the same book. It has the same story, but it doesn't have the last two enhanced components, hardcover and the study guide. But the reason how we got here is because basically through editing. So the first version, we didn't like certain aspects of it, so we tweaked that, and then our first version of our hardcover had an error that we didn't like. I almost lost my, Gilbert thought it wasn't that big of a deal, and we still sold all the books that came in that realm. And just like Jacqueline said, errors, grammatical errors, sometimes don't even have anything to do with you. It may not have been that you missed anything. By the time it made it to print, they could have just hit a button and then it throws off the entire book, or something happens. Spell check actually can mess stuff up. So when it goes through, like, edits, errors sometimes happen. Don't beat yourself up about that, because it's part of the process. Even the biggest publishing companies with the most reputable records have it happen regularly. So know that the last thing I would say is you do need to understand, and I think Jacqueline was alluding to this, we are. So if you decide to go the self-publishing route as a Black or person of color, an author, you're going to be under much more scrutiny and pressure than anyone else. It just is what it is. And so you need to understand that. That's why I think it's important to prioritize having an official editor in the process for you. Because if you miss something that could mean something to a certain audience, they're going to make a judgment about how good you are at what you're trying to do. And that's when the editor is being paid to do, to make sure they refine that part of that. It's really worth investing in, because you don't know what people are looking for. But what I can tell you is that, just like we dealt with earlier, Lakeisha, we all have powerful stories to tell the world, and we are reclaiming what we deserve in our communities, and not everybody's going to like that. But we do need to be a couple steps ahead of them in the critiques that they're going to have about what we have to say. But we tell our own truth, our own story, our own history, our own narrative, and that does make some people offended. So we have to be a couple steps ahead of them to make sure that whatever they have to say is not based on the merit of our work. It's just their own issue. So make sure you're thinking about that when you're going through the process, because we're not immune or exempt from scrutiny.
All great points. So I thought we could have an entire conversation about the cultural nuances of being an author. That's something. I saw you come off mute.
So, and just, to add just a teensy bit to that, my book is, my book series it's fiction, and it's set in rural Mississippi during the 1930s and 1940s. And so I write in Southern dialect. So, and that's tricky in itself, because spell check is going to go crazy. I mean, it's just, what it is. So editing a book like that was tricky from the start. So, and not that that's inexcusable. If you choose to go that route, you have to take all of that into consideration. So yeah, I want to just get that out.
No, that's a great point. All books aren't created equal, and the editing is just not a flat process. Like, it might look really different for different needs. That makes sense. Is there an average amount of time, just like really quickly, like, is there an average amount of time for the editing process? Does it vary? I'm just trying to get an idea of how long that process could be, or how short, or does it really vary?
I think it definitely would vary. It would vary depending on how long the book is. If it's a children's book, in my opinion, and it's relatively short, the editing process probably wouldn't be that long. Mm-hmm. If it's a 250-page novel, then the editing process could be pretty, gruesome and tedious, and all of the above. But if you take it bit by bit, I would suggest having your work edited a little bit at a time. Chapter by chapter is still too much. If it's a 250 to 300 page novel, have it edited, I would say maybe 3 to 5 pages at a time. That way, once you have the finished product, you don't have to worry about doing this complete overhaul, and I'm, speaking from experience and on what I wish I had done. So I can give you, that as a gift to say, do that editing, little bit, chunks at a time, so that you'll have a better chance, especially if you go the self-publishing route, of, having a more polished finish.
Yeah, I agree with everything Jacqueline said. The only thing I would echo is, definitely don't cheat yourself on prioritizing this in your budget. You can find pretty solid editors out here for reasonable prices, and this is what they do. My experience, though, is that you do need, so if you're writing multiple books, so our intention is by next year we'll probably be on book 3 or 4. We're using some of the same people, in particular our editors. So I do agree with Jacqueline's point that if I know I've used you multiple times, then I would probably prefer to just have you go with us. But if I'm using you for the first time, I may want to have you do chunks at a time. I think, though, just to make this real for you, the book writing process for us took over a year. So the editing phase itself probably took at least, and again, it could be different for you if you're just writing and that's all you're going to do. If you're not going to work, you're not going to do if you're not going to support your family, if you're not going to do all these things, then it's a full-time job for you. So the process could be much faster. But if you're still intending to live your life, I don't really see this happening any faster than about a quarter. It's going to take you about 3 to 4 months to get through this process. There's going to be some back and forth. You'll eventually figure it out, but don't think that it's going to happen much faster than a quarter. And that's assuming that you get a groove and you really know what you're doing. It could be a longer process than most people realize. So just understand that if you know that you have the financial resources to where you're just getting ready to plug in and shut down your life for 6 months, then you might have it might be faster for you. Like for me, when I went through my dissertation, the editing process was probably half the time for my dissertation than it was for the actual book. But because I was really in a different groove and writing a more structured way, as opposed to with the book.
Got it. That is helpful. And I see somebody in the chat said, connect with nonprofit literary agents as well. I see head nods. There's definitely resources. And luckily we have Google and some connections. So that's great. I see some yes, love it, love it, love it. So I feel like all roads have led us to this point. We have our book, we poured into it, we've gotten all this great feedback, we're owning the narrative. We're like, okay, I'm owning this timeline as much as I possibly can to get this thing to the finish line. And now we need to make it available publicly for everyone else to read and enjoy. So let's talk options. So we know, most of us feel like the traditional option, or at least the traditional option of days past, is utilizing a publishing house. Obviously, we know that they're widely known and they're extremely competitive, and I'm sure they're expensive. But more and more authors are opting to self-publish. I feel like especially authors of color, even going the ebooks route and the audiobooks route. So, you could even put a book out, like Jacqueline said, you could put it on audio yourself. that news to me. And you don't have to be like a President Barack Obama or Will Smith, who's in the middle of his book tour, to have your work on Amazon or Audible. Like, there's options for everybody to get involved. So can you all talk more just about these options and how someone would know what the best option for them is?
I think today, the publishing house option is always, I'm kind of dating myself, but in my day, when I was coming out of grad school, when I was in graduate school, that was all the buzz. Oh, you get your book published, by a big, by a random house, by, Penguin Books or whatever have you. So that was sort of the goal then. You want to do that. And then, I started researching, and a lot of more people were doing self-publishing. Here's why self-publishing can put you in a position of power, right? Because I know people personally who've had their books published by Penguin House or Random House, and they haven't sold millions of books. People still don't know who they are, right? All of these things that you're programmed to believe that will happen once you have a book, that is published. Now, it doesn't go to say that it doesn't happen for people, because we walk past, these bookstores and we see these books that are on the New York Times bestsellers list. Obviously, yes, that happens. But what you learn over the years is that it's a who knows who game in the publishing game. Most people know people who, who get their books published that way. They may know somebody who knows somebody, okay? Or, Toni Morrison, she, of course, her work, went on to speak for itself, but she worked in the publishing industry for many years. So she knew exactly what they were looking for, and she knew the ins and outs, and she knew all of those things. But self-publishing is, puts you in the position of power, because you can control every aspect of it. You can control your audience, you can control so many other things. And because we live in the age of technology, I think it's important for people to be able to access your book online. And I think it's important for people to be able to listen to your book on Audible. So all of those things are important. So all of that to say, you don't need anybody to validate your work. That's just not the world we live in anymore. You validate yourself by putting your work out there for the world, because if it changes one person's, life, especially, depending on the genre that you're writing, if you're doing inspiration or self-help, or just, nonfiction, and if you know that it's good work and it'll change somebody's life, put it out there. Then self-publishing is probably the best route to go. What was I going to say? Agents and publishing houses may not always see your vision. And just to speak to that a little bit, I mean, some of the biggest names in the literary world were turned down multiple times. Stephanie Myers, who wrote the Twilight series. They didn't want to, nobody saw her vision at first. They're like, what is this? No. So she got so many no's before, she got that one yes. J.K. Rowling, same thing. Harry Potter, people told her no because they didn't see her vision. So she had, you have to believe in your vision, and it just really puts you in a position of power. And one more short story regarding putting your work out there on your own. Issa Rae, all right? Issa started off with a YouTube series, right, about the the insecure Black girl. I can't even think of the name of it. The adventures of the does anybody remember what the name of that series was?
Awkward Black Girl.
There you go. Yes. Adventures of the Awkward Black Girl on YouTube. And she put that out there, and HBO called her. So if you have good work and you know that this is your lane, and you believe in it, that's all you have to believe in it. Then that's there. As far as Audible and audiobook is concerned, I admonish anyone who's publishing a book now, get your book on Audible, make it an audiobook as well, because the market for it right now is huge. And I think the pandemic may have had something to do with it, because I don't know about anybody else, but that's when I really got on board with audiobooks. And I was like, my husband had been trying to, tell me for years, you need your book on Audible, you need your books on Audible. And finally, my first book is on Audible. I am almost finished with recording book 2 for Audible, but just goes to show you what the market is. People who've had books published years ago are now just recording them on Audible. Barack Obama's book, Dreams of My Father, that book sold, over 1 million copies years ago, but he just recorded it for Audible within the past couple of months because he sees this market, or his team said, hey, you need to get this book on Audible because there are people who won't pick up a book, but they'll hit play, right? So you need to record this book on Audible and record the book yourself. People want to hear the authors read their own books, okay? So I can't say that enough, because your story, and I'm a fiction writer, so I know the characters' voices, the inflections, and all of these things. And even if it's nonfiction, your story, and you can tell it better than anyone else. So get your book on Audible.
Love it. Very thorough. I love we talk about a position of power. That's good. Taking ownership and just, because sometimes I think it could feel like, especially with publishing house, that maybe you don't have as much control, I imagine, in some things. So with self-publishing, you have more of that creative control from start to finish, which I know is really high value to a lot of people. So thank you. Dr. Allen.
Yeah, Jacqueline did a great job of being able to give a comprehensive perspective. I think the only thing I would add is just try to view your story like music artists view their work as masters. So just know that, if you go to a publishing house, they sort of, you get some say, but they now own the story. So there's value in that. So we wrote the first book, and we did the self-publishing route. And what I do think it's helpful, and the biggest thing I think people have to understand when you're writing a story is take yourself serious. And by taking yourself serious, you have to get your story down in an authentic voice, but then you also have to invest in the money it costs to get it out there the right way. And so all those different components, you can't really shortchange, otherwise it'll have some impact on what you're going to ultimately do with that. So don't rush the process. It's okay to like get your story done and have it sitting as you're making sure that you can afford an editor. And then as you're making sure you can afford these different pieces, like you would, do renovations in your home, like don't rush that process because you now have your story done. It's okay to have it sitting and then wait to get the editor and then wait to get an illustrator and then wait to get these different parts. Because when you get it out into the world, you can't take it back. So think through that part. The publishing house, so Jacqueline and I both, I feel like we need to own this. We're a bit more biased, especially for new and aspiring authors, to go the self-publishing route. If you have a brand, you have established, so we both are established authors. Our book, Gilbert and I's second book, we're probably gonna go the publishing house route, but we know we've already established a market. We're clear about that. And we know that there's a market that wants our book for older grade level. And so the second book is speaking to that. So when we go into a publishing house, we can say, we know the average book for a self-published author sells 200 to 500 books over the life of it. We sold 5,000 in 6 months. So we know when we sit down to leverage with the publishing house, that's information we can talk about. We can say how it did, if it won the awards, leverage my position as an educator and his as a social worker. That gives us information to get what we know we deserve, but we didn't have anything when we wrote the first book. So we would have had all the leverage against us, and we didn't want to take that risk. Now we did have to eat more costs for advertising, for marketing, for all those different things that the publishing company will do. We had to plan for that in our budget, and it was worth the risk for us. That's off your plate if you go to publishing house route. So just keep those things in mind. Those are the only things that I would say to give a bit more perspective, is that publishing house will get you into those doors. It'll be easier to get into Barnes and Nobles. It'll be easier to get through those pieces. Whereas when you do the self-publishing, you're on your own, but you do have control over who gets your story, how, when. If you want a hard copy of Brotherly Loves today, you can only get it from us. You can't even get it from anywhere online. You have to go through us. But if you want our story, you can go through Amazon and get the paperback book, which is the cheapest version of it. We're good with that, but at the same time, we have control over who's getting our word and where it's coming from, and the profit margin as well. So,
got it. Very, very, very helpful. Thank you both. Really quickly on this same point, can you just talk about any of like those additional steps that people may not think about when it comes to putting your work out, like a certain bank account or having an LLC or a big money bag for all the funds that you're going to receive? Like what else do you need, really quickly, if you just rattled off a little list?
Well, I would just say, in terms of royalties, because I have an LLC, JJA Entertainment. So my royalties go into my business's bank account. So it's not attached to me at all. So just in case one day 100,000 people decided to download my book on Kindle, or they decided to in one day, right, purchase the book on Audible, and this huge lump sum comes to me, for tax purposes, right? And from the government's perspective, they won't come after me saying, where's my cut? So then, when you can look at it from a different perspective at that point, you might want to look into that, set up an LLC at the very least. And yes.
Yep, I would say the same thing. Just like Jacqueline said, the only thing, the book for us was really the first venture under the business of Holistic Equity Leadership Consulting. So we really center both texts that'll be out, both books, as resources. They're not just books to read for pleasure, but we also have it as a resource to where we can walk leaders and students through how to operationalize the different components that we think are necessary. Everything from systemic racism to the importance of therapy in one's life and mindfulness. So it's a resource. So we see it as a teaching tool that came through our business. And so we funded it through that as well. So any of the royalties, all of that's going directly there for all the reasons that Jacqueline highlighted. I think it's a smart move to go. You can still pay yourself, but from an accounting perspective, it's better to have it going through a streamlined process, because otherwise, like you said, if things happen too fast, and we all are expecting and planning for, one day we're going to open up and there's some extra zeros at the end, that's good, but it's easier if it's already in its own line item in its own separate account. to be able to protect you.
Got it. Yes, preparedness for all this influx of customers and buying and extra money, and I love it. That is very helpful. So making sure that the books are in order. Thank you so much for humoring me with that. We have talked about so much, and I know I've asked a lot of questions. As always, you all are absolutely amazing. I always learn so much, and I'm taking mental notes, but I also have my own separate notes. I hope everyone else has their own separate notes, and I hope everyone else has been enjoying this. Thank you all so much. I want to give the audience a chance to ask any questions. I know we're coming to time. So are there any burning questions from the audience? Feel free to either use the raised hand function or you could drop them in the chat. We'll just give you all a moment. Okay, I see a hand. Kyla.
Hello. So I kind of came in late because I had technical difficulties. So I don't know if you went over this, but my question was like, what do you do when you have like different genres of like books that you want to write? So for instance, I have one that's like about self-love, then I have one that I want to write for children, then I have one about women's health. And so how do you keep your audience with all those different genres you want to write?
Well, if you have different genres, then quite naturally you'll have different audiences. So if you have a self-help book, then that'll be one particular audience, but are you gearing it toward women or everyone, or women or people in a certain age range? So that's one thing you want to think about before, right? Not necessarily before you start, but at some point along the way to think about who your readers are, why you're writing it. So it kind of goes back to that, why you're writing this particular book. So there are authors who write, a bit of everything. Some authors may have been writing novels geared toward adults for years, and then they'll, say, I want to write a children's book after they become parents. And then they'll switch gears and do that. And then they may want to write a self-help book. So yeah, not boxing yourself in, that's great, but just understand that you'll have different kinds of audiences, and that's not a bad thing at all.
Thank you.
I would also add, I think Jacqueline's points are completely on point. I would add, in addition to what she's saying, it's really important to prioritize. You cannot, none of us are able to take on the magnitude of the financial cost and emotional toll to do multiple projects at the same time. So if you got 3 stories that you want to write and you have them done, like I say, write them. If you're capable of pumping them out, get them out, because now you have them sitting. But you need to prioritize which one's going first. Get it done and finish that, and then move on to your second one, then move on to your third one. If you're trying to manage 3 different books, I'm saying this as an educator who loves writing, it's impossible to do it in a way that's going to really yield your product and your story to maximize what you're trying to do. So focus on, I already start to know what's your first priority. So we knew we wanted to write multiple books, but we couldn't write 3 books if we didn't have the first book done. Once we finished the first book, it made book 2 much more easy for us to go through the process. And I am thinking just like you, like I am thinking, I want to write an academic book that centers this. I want to write a fictional book that goes through this. I want to do a memoir, but I can't do any of that if I don't focus on the first book, get that done, and master the process, because many of the pieces will trickle over. It is different though when you start thinking about the target audience. But I would highly suggest you to only get your first project done. And as you do, you'll see how that mirrors what you'll need to do for your second one. You may have to add new members of your team. So if you wrote a self-help book and now you're writing a graphic novel, then you need people who specialize in that in your team. So some of the people you can keep the same, like your editor, but you may need your illustrator to be different, or you may not even have an illustrator in the first book, and you need that as a part of this team. So think through that, keep it simple though, and try to focus on one project at a time.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you both. Tiffany?
Hello, my question is for Miss Jacqueline. With my different books, not one of them is on Audible at all. So you really put a little bug in my ear. I was like, oh yeah, okay. Didn't explore that totally. But one of the reasons was like, I have the young adult books, and So of course there's different characters, and someone told me that I should probably invest into actors, like have some professional like kids to do that. But I heard you say something about using your own voice. I think that could work for, I have a children's book. But again, that's from a father's point of view, father to daughter. And so I was like, would they want that in my voice, or should I find again a male for that one? And then of course my poetry book, I'm pretty sure I could definitely do the poetry book on Audible. So I'm just looking for some advice, because there are different genres. And so, you know, would your theory of like using my voice work, or should I invest in someone else?
Well, I mean, that's an important point that you brought up. So if you go to sites like acx.com, I'm going to put it here in the chat. ACX. So it's ACX. I'm not sure if that's the actual URL or whatever have you, but you have the opportunity to hire people. I mean, there are people lined up waiting to read your work. Okay. So they're hired by ACX or whatever have you, and then you would pay. I'm not sure how that works, because I read my own books, but there are actors and actresses who will read your work for you. It's just a matter of preference. In the research that I've done, and the kind of books that I've written, in that research, I've discovered that people would rather hear the author read their work. So yeah, I mean, if you have your characters or different voices, I mean, I do everybody's voices, men, women, kids, everything, because I have that range, and it's funny and it's entertaining for me to do it. So, but that's me. If that's not your forte, because for some people it isn't, then by all means, yes, hire, the actors or whoever, because the people are on standby waiting to do it. And you don't have to just, pick their names out of a hat. There's a process that you go through. You can hear them read a portion of your book or a few pages, and then you decide, yeah, I like her voice or I like his voice. Then you can do that. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. That's great advice.
Thank you. We also need to add voice actor to your resume. Jacqueline, she was like, I can do this, I can do that.
It's so funny. It's just one of those things. That's why it's so funny. I'm having such a great time recording the books for Audible, because when I've done read for years, when I do readings, people are they're cracking up because I'm doing these voices. But I just think that that's what brings it to life for me. So
makes perfect sense. I think we probably have time for one more question. I see one in the chat from Allison. In terms of budgeting, could you give an idea of the cost for everything, inclusive of publishing through Clearinghouse, self-publishing, and Audible for the process?
So I'll exclude Audible for us, because we haven't paid for that. We do have our Audible book that's waiting to essentially go through the process. But for the children's book, from start of the process all the way through public publishing, it was probably about 6 to 8K. That doesn't include marketing. That doesn't include any of those types of things that are necessary. Publicists, all that type of stuff that we ultimately went in the direction of. But I would say a true cost for us for a children's book, similar to what we wanted to get out in the market, was about 6 to 8K. And that's bare bones. So that's assuming that they're not pumping any money into some of the pieces that are necessary for large scale advertisement, like Kirkus reviews to get people to review your book, working with different marketing firms to do stuff like that. But just the true cost of getting a book to print for us, that does include like illustrating, the editor, that type of stuff, was about 6 to 8K.
Yeah, and I think it can be different, too, depending on what you like to do. It can be less than that, or it can be more than that, just depending on what you're willing to pay. But it can, I would just say, do your research, find out what is within, your range, and go that route.
That is helpful. what I'm hearing is have a budget. I've heard it a few times, but have a plan and have a budget, so you could probably be prepared. And I know some costs are probably unexpected with anything, but at least you have some sort of net for it's like, okay, well, this is all I have. So if it's going too far past that, then we might have to arrange some things like Dr. Allen, I think you were talking about prioritizing. Some things might have to wait. So thank you so much for that. Thank you all for these wonderful questions. And thank you all again for your wonderful answers and your insight and your expertise. With that, I am going to turn it back to Lakeisha.
Thank you, Bria. Thank you to Bria and Dr. Allen, Dr. Michael Allen, and Gilbert Allen and Jacqueline Andrews for their time today. I do want to share something. We got a lot of gems today, and you all know it. And we've been writing them down. And someone put Dr. Allen's words into a nice little graphic. I hope you guys can see this, where he said, be willing to risk who you are for who you want to be. So I'm definitely going to put this, Lisa did it. So Dr. Allen, you cannot give me the kudos. I didn't do it, but Lisa did. So Lisa, if you wouldn't mind putting that in the chat again for everybody. Dr. Allen, is that okay with you?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, perfect. I just think the words are so fitting and wonderful. This was really wonderful. Thank you for showing up today, attending this event. Thank you for showing up for yourself to learn something on something that you're clearly passionate about. I hope that this fueled whatever it is you're trying to do. I know sitting here listening to the authors talk, I didn't just get knowledge, I felt the love and the passion that they have for their craft and that they were giving to us. So again, thank you so much for spending your time here with us today. And now I will turn it over to our Vice President, Michelle R. Clark.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. That was simply outstanding. I'm really speechless right now. And well, first of all, let me just say I'm the program chairman for Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, Lambda Tau Omega chapter, and it is such an honor to have you all join Author Bootcamp Part 2 today. So thank you so much for spending this Saturday afternoon with us. Exemplifying excellence through sustainable service. It is our international program theme, but it is also our call to action. And the arts is one of our international program initiatives. The arts, as you are already aware, it brings us joy, it helps us to express our values, it builds bridges between cultures, and it's also a fundamental component of a healthy community. It helps to strengthen our community socially, educationally, as well as economically. Even in a pandemic, it persists in even difficult social and economic times, such as our pandemic. It improves our mood, it changes the way we look at life, it provides different perspectives, and it also provides an uplifting opportunity for our well-being. Many people around the world have different motivations, as we discussed today, to write a book, and many of them embark on this journey, but many people do not. Many people have doubts, they have fears, which is totally human, but writing a book may eventually become a huge, unique, and positive experience with so many advantages to take from it. Writing a book will inspire you. It will be a great experience in terms of from an emotional as well as a personal level. It gives you a chance to express your imagination, your creativity. And today we had so many wonderful, as our chairman mentioned, gems from receiving feedback, the size of the books relating to platforms, whether you should go paperback or hardcover, choosing a title and a cover, publishing options, Audible books, using your own voice or using that of someone else, book editing, royalties, and so much more. Our guest today, Dr. Michael Allen, thank you. Ms. Jacqueline Andrews, thank you. This has been an outstanding workshop, absolutely wonderful. Thank you for sharing your personal journeys, your expertise, as we continue to learn how we can develop our strategies on writing a book. This was outstanding. And thank you so much to our Arts Committee Chairman, Lakeisha Daniel Johnson, our co-chairman, Ciola Barnes, our panelists. Bria, I didn't know that you were like, you had this in you. I'm going to be calling you Sor Bria Perdaman, who was our moderator today. Outstanding job. And the entire committee, the Arts Committee, for their vision and their leadership. So thank you all so very much. We again thank you for joining us today. We invite you to please continue to visit our website, which is ltoaka.org, for all of our upcoming programs. We hope that you enjoyed this as much as I have, and I'm looking forward to all the wonderful books that are going to be coming out as a result of this. So thank you again to our guest speakers. Thank you to the committee. We hope you have a wonderful holiday season. And again, thank you for joining us. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you, Michelle. Goodbye.
Bye, everybody. Thank you again.